Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Evaluators Toolkit. We're going to be completing a three-part series of webinars that have highlighted the various uses of the WIIP program. We have previously talked about using the WIIP resources as part of a referral process, using the checklist to collect some of the data necessary for conducting a comprehensive assessment. We also talked about how the WIIP program will also take the information with regards to how the student performed on specific tests and provide you with some recommendations to include in your report. Today, what we're going to talk about is how we can use the WIIP to assist with report writing. And I want to point out the word assist here. The WIIP report is in no way intended to be a comprehensive report highlighting the student's strengths and weaknesses, but it does provide us with some important information that we can take and integrate into our more interpretive report. And I'll show you what I mean by that when we get to some of the examples of the write-ups that are provided by the WIIP program. There's a lot of reporting out of student scores, students' proficiency, etc. But it doesn't go into the deep interpretive levels in which we need to, really explain students' performance, but also to integrate other data sources that aren't found within the WIIP into that comprehensive report. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Tammy Stevens. I am employee of Riverside Insights. So let me flip over to the next slide. A little bit about my background. I've worked as a special education teacher, an educational diagnostician in public schools in the Texas area. I've also served as an assistant professor of special education before moving over to the publishing world. So I've been with Riverside working in sales and training for the last 10 years, I guess, 8 years. So again, excited to be here to kind of talk with you about the WIIP and to kind of wrap up everything, all the different features of the WIIP. So just a few housekeeping items before we get to the agenda. I do have 3 handouts that are attached for you to download and save. One is a copy of this PowerPoint deck. The other is an assessment services bulletin. It's the ASB 6, and it's featuring the use of WJ tests within a comprehensive dyslexia evaluation. And I shared that particular resource because we're going to be talking about one of the features, one of the reports that can be run through the WIIP program, and that's the dyslexia report. And that dyslexia report was basically modeled off of that assessment services bulletin and the little tool that is included in that bulletin. So if you be sure to save that as a PDF. It's also housed up under Riverside Score under the resources tab. So if for whatever reason you aren't able to save it, you can always go into Riverside Score later and pull it down from the resources tab. I also put a pricing sheet for the WIIP, attached that just in case someone has questions about what it costs to purchase the WIIP, because it is an add-on program that's associated with the WJ and with the ECAD. I am recording this, so if you get pulled away and you need to listen to it in its entirety, you can always email me. My email address is on that last slide. And you can just email me and I'll send that to you. The other thing I wanted to remind you is that we have one more Beyond the Score session that's going to be this Friday. This will complete our spring offerings. So we're in the process of planning our fall sessions. We may take a break during the summer. I know a lot of you guys need breaks, and start back up here probably in August or so. So Again, as I've always said on these solicited feedback from you guys with regards to any topics that you'd like to see on future Beyond the Score webinars, feel free to drop that in the chat in today's session, or you can always, again, email me with any suggestions that you have. All right. I think that takes care of our housekeeping. So let's go ahead and get started. There's a little overlap with the information that's going to be provided today from if you guys were here for the first and the second presentations about the WIIP. For those of you, I wanted to provide a little bit of foundational information for those of you who maybe this is your first webinar from that series. So I want to go ahead and talk about understand the importance of linking assessment data to instructional programming. We know that's a major part of our role as evaluators, is we have to be able to not only assess the child and collect the data with regards to the students, strengths and weaknesses within their cognitive, achievement, and language areas, but we also have to be able to take that information and use it in our instructional programming. And so taking it to help create the IEP for the student, if that student meets criteria and is found to qualify for special education services. And even for those kiddos who don't qualify, we want to be able to provide some recommendations with regards to instructional programming to their teachers as well. So it's always important that we link that information together. I'm going to highlight just real quickly the features of the WIIP program, and then we'll talk a little bit about understanding the power of the WIIP for data collection. But really the focus of today's is we're really going to be showing you the report writing component of the program. And again, if you have any questions that come up during the session, you can post those in the question box as well, and I'll get to those at the end. So again, one of our major responsibilities when we're assessing children is to take that assessment data and link it to instructional programming. And we want to, again, be able to, that's something that the WIIP does for us, but it also allows us to kind of, it helps us streamline the report writing process. And as I said, it should not be used by itself as a report, but you can take components of the report and integrate it into your report and triangulate the data that's collected from the WJ products with the other data that's been collected on the student, like grades, work samples, benchmarks, state testing results, etc. So we know that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act provides us with the guidance with regards to the fact that we have to use a variety of assessment tools and strategies to gather relevant functional, developmental, and academic information about the child. It also states that we have to also include information provided by the parent, and then that all this information together should be utilized to assist in determining whether a child has a disability and use that information to help create that individualized educational program for that particular child. So we talked in our previous trainings about the importance of, okay, we know we have a student who is struggling in the general education classroom. They're not able to access the general ed curriculum. Their performance is atypical in relation to peers. So when we're conducting our assessments, we have to look at that individual student and gain an understanding as to why that student is struggling and is not able to make progress in the general ed curriculum. Now, the next step of that is once we identify the individual needs of the student, we also have to determine, well, what impact is this disability, if they have a disability, what impact is that disability going to have on their involvement and progress in the general ed curriculum? And once we've determined that, the impact of the disability, that's when we can really look at what does this student need, right? What do they need to be successful in the classroom? And that's where your recommendations, your accommodations, modifications, etc., come into play. So again, IDEA sets the guidelines for identifying a student with a disability, and it specifies which conditions qualify that student for special education services. And we know that when, again, according to policy, when we are conducting a full and individual evaluation, whether it's an initial or a reevaluation, the local education agency must use a variety of assessment tools and strategies to gain relevant information. And that relevant information not only includes developmental information about the student, their history, developmental history, their academic information, what has their academic history looked like, have they struggled for a while in a particular area. We also have to look at functional performance. How is the disability impacting the students' functional behaviors? Is there, do they need help with, you know, do they struggle with peer interaction? Do they struggle with communication skills, organizational skills, etc.? So we should be looking at using a variety of assessment tools to gain insight about each individual student with regards to their functioning, their developmental, and their academic information. And as I said before, we also have to include information provided by the parent. And again, all that should be used to make those decisions about what that student needs to be successful. So once we have conducted that assessment, then we have to write up our results. So when we're writing up those results, it's important that we recognize that we're telling that student's story. So we are presenting information in a written document that's highlighting the processes that we went through to conduct the assessment. It's also supporting and showing that we followed the law. We've integrated multiple sources of data. We haven't made decisions about a student based off of one test score. We've merged information from checklists, from parents, from teachers, from the student, etc. So we have to, as part of our job, is to consolidate all that information into a report that's going to be easily understood by the reader. And again, I showed this picture before because I think this is a powerful statement and a powerful thing for us to remember, is that our assessment results, our full individual evaluation, our report really serves as the legal foundation of the IEP. So there should be a direct link between what our findings are from the assessment and what the IEP looks like, what those goals and objectives are, whether or not that student needs specific accommodations or modifications. There should be, again, a very direct link between our assessment and our IEP. And of course, the more comprehensive the assessment and the report, the stronger the IEP is going to be. We use that data as we're supposed to. I know that for years there's been a disconnect in the field in a lot of places in which the evaluator will do their assessment, write up the report. The report will be presented in the IEP meeting or the ARD meeting. But sometimes the proposed goals and objectives are created by a teacher, a special ed teacher, etc., based on other data that they've collected. So there's has not been this direct link between what our assessment results are and the IEP. But there's been a major push in the last few years to ensure that there is that direct link between the two. And when we have that direct link and we're utilizing the data that we've collected through our assessment, it's better able to really stand up in due process should you go to a due process hearing. So again, your data collected really serves as the driver of the IEP. This is what gives us information with regards to how that student is performing, if they're performing typically in certain areas and atypically in other areas. It's also going to provide us with information with regards to levels, how far, delayed, how much delay is there for that student in a certain area, et cetera. It's going to allow us to make those decisions with regards to goals and objectives, et cetera. So again, just the relationship between the evaluation and the IEP, which I think that we pretty much stated. Your evaluation data will be used. We'll need to use that information to create our PLAF statements, our present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. From there, we have goals and objectives that are created, educational needs determined, any accommodations, and then again, the IEP committee will make decision about appropriate placement for the child. So with our requirement that our assessment be comprehensive in nature, we have to ask ourselves as evaluators, does the FIE include all areas of suspected disability and related needs? So the next couple slides just kind of reminds us that we have to look at academics, yes. We have to look at processing, yes. We have to look at functional behaviors as well. And when we're looking at, especially when we're using the pattern of strengths and weaknesses model, when we're looking at strengths and weaknesses, we have to make sure that multiple sources of data converge in those areas that support the strength or support the weakness. We have to remember that a standard score or score report alone does not establish a pattern. We have to merge that data with the other data that's been collected. And that's something we'll talk more about on Friday if you guys join us for the CSEP presentation. We really heavily focus on multiple sources of data. Those multiple sources of data really establish the foundation for the assessment and really kind of drive our testing plan and our assessment plan. We also, when we're looking at the data that's been collected, we also have to determine whether there's any conflicting data. And if there are outliers that don't align with the majority of the data, we need to investigate why. Because again, we cannot ignore any of the data collected, because all the data tells us something about the student. And again, in addition to having that data, making those decisions with regards to strengths and weaknesses, we have to look at how does the disability affect the student's access and progress in the general curriculum, and then what unique and individualized recommendations are included. And that's where those the WIIIP comes in handy to help kind of facilitate that process as well. So when we're talking about multiple sources of data, we're talking about using informal data along with our norm reference testing data. And with the norm reference testing data, we know that part of the data that's presented to us that we're going to consider is going to include the score reports, right? It's going to include standard scores, RPIs, etc. But some of the other important data that we can collect from the use of the norm reference test includes observations that are made during the testing session. Those observations provide us with insight with regards to how that student goes about problem solving or performing a task. You know, we can look at if the student, what does the student's motivation look like? Are they persistent? Do they work through harder problems, or are they easy? Are they quick to say don't know? Are they attentive? All that important data is going to be included in the informal data, and it's very rich information that we need. We've done a couple webinars on Beyond the Score. We've talked about getting the most out of your WJ tests. And when we stop our interpretation at the standard score or percentile level, again, we miss out on important information about students' learning, students' performance. We have to go deeper and use the other data sources like the observations and things like that when we're making decisions about students. But again, with the WIIP, we have checklists and observation forms that can be included and should be included in the report. So those checklists, again, help us collect, organize, and document important information about the examinee. So my previous webinar went over those checklists, so I'm not going to go over each of these individually, but I do want to remind you, these are 6 checklists that you can download and make copies of. If you have the WIIP program, there's a reason for referral checklist, there's parent and teacher checklists, there's classroom behavior observation form. We went through all these last time. So, and I apologize for the quality of this, but I wanted to show where exactly you find those checklists and add them to the student's report, if you will. So when you go into the program, you can see I'm on the page where you add your test records and enter the scores. So if you have the WIIP program, when you go to that drop down where it says select test record or checklist, at the bottom of that row is going to list all the different checklists that are included in the WIIP program. So you can see the reason for referral checklist is highlighted here. So if I clicked on that, it would I could hit add and it would add it to the platform, and then I can just open it up within the platform and fill in the parents' information or the reason for referral information. So again, we talked last time about how the WIIP links assessment results to instructional programming and helps facilitate the report writing process. So there's 2 different types of reports that you can get from the WIIP program. So when you purchase the WJ, you get a score report, and that's basically a report that has just those, basically a table of scores. But with the WIIP program, it provides you with a more comprehensive report. So we have a comprehensive report and we have a dyslexia report that can be run through the WIIP program. So it's designed basically to help create comprehensive psychological and educational reports and facilitate the report writing. And by outlining and linking students' assessment results with recommendations, that takes gives the evaluator more time to really focus on the interpretation and program planning, instead of having to go search for those recommendations that are going to be most appropriate for the student. It links the WJ results to evidence-based and formative interventions, and it also provides criterion reference checklists. So we talked about those checklists, and those checklists can be, again, entered directly into the system and included in the report, which I'm going to show you at the end of today's session, some sections from an actual report. So again, it really helps educators meet legal and regulatory mandates, right? And facilitates the database decision making, etc. So there's that convenient web-based entry via Riverside Score. Again, there's over 500 interventions and accommodations in the database. Again, it streamlines the comprehensive report. It gives options to include more interpretive details for tests and clusters. And again, there's a dyslexia report that can be run, as well as a report for the ECAD. All right, I think I've already talked about that. I'm going to skip to the next slide. So let's take a look at the comprehensive report. So the comprehensive report provides interpretive overview, narrative of performances on tests and clusters administered. So it's got a lot more verbiage than what you find in the regular score report. There's also an Appendix A that can be included if you select it as an option, and it gives detailed interpretation of cluster scores and test results. And then also, as I mentioned, if selected, those checklists, evidence-based informative interventions can be included in the report. And then you do get a copy of the score report that's included in the body of the report. So you don't have to run a score report separate of a comprehensive report. That score report is actually embedded in the comprehensive report. So again, if you have the WIIP program, when you go to run the report, you can see you would choose your product there, the WJ, and then under report type, you would click on that downward caret and you would choose comprehensive report. So choose that comprehensive report. This is what it looks like when I clicked on the downward arrow. You've got the comprehensive report. There's a dyslexia report as well. So I just wanted to show you that that's where you would find both of the reports included in the WIIP program. So there's two options that can be used for the basis of interpretation. So you as the evaluator will pick and choose which option you want to use for the interpretation. So it can be based on standard scores, so comparing that student's performance to the peer, their same aged or grade level norms. Or you can choose the proficiency level as the basis of interpretation. And that's where the student's performance is presented from the focus on the RPI, that relative proficiency index. That particular option is what's going to describe functionality. How well can the student perform a certain task in relation to their peers. Remember, standard scores only tell us the student's place in line, whereas our RPIs are going to tell us more about what that student's proficiency and functioning is like when asked to perform a certain task. So two very different lenses. I always recommend that you look at both when you're analyzing the student's results, because sometimes the standard score can overestimate or underestimate the student's performance. And if we really want to understand how that student is functioning in the classroom, we need to really take a closer look at the RPI, because that RPI is more aligned to students' classroom performance. So looking at the standard score option, this is just an excerpt from the report that would show you what that might look like. So John's overall intellectual ability as measured by the WJ-GIA standard score 73 is in the low range of others his age. They ran age-based norms. There's a 95% probability that his true GIA score would be included in the range of standard scores from 69 to 77. So it basically writes just a synopsis about explaining the standard score. So again, it's giving you a little bit of the data, but not everything you need to write a comprehensive report. And then here's another example of the standard score option. You know, it just basically goes through and talks about his standard scores are within the superior range for one test, the letter pattern matching, and when it's within the high range, average range for one test verbal attention. So it's basically regurgitating what's in the table of scores. But for you to go, you as an evaluator have to go deeper into the interpretation. So what does this mean for the student, and how is it likely to affect the student in the classroom? So that was looking at the write-ups from the aspect of standard scores. This is an example from the aspect of proficiency. John's overall intellectual ability as measured by the WJ-GIA cluster is limited when compared to others of his age. So here's another example. Cognitive measures, John's proficiency level is within the very advanced range for one test, And again, it just basically restates those proficiency levels for John on those tests that were administered. And then here's an example comparing the two options. So there's a letter pattern matching, looking at standard score interpretation versus a letter pattern matching RPI. So this child had a standard score of 127 and an RPI of 100 over 90. For those of you who aren't familiar with the RPI, what that means is that when same age peers, if they ran age-based norms, when same age peers performed at 90% proficiency, this particular student scored or performed at 100% proficiency. So this particular student is very advanced in the area of orthographic processing when comparing his performance to his peers. So this is the appendix that can be included if you choose to include it. That's the detailed interpretation of the clusters and tests. So it goes through and provides, again, more of a detailed interpretation where it incorporates both standard score information as well as RPI information. So you choose which way you want the interpretation to be based, whether it's through the standard score or the proficiency. You also retain responsibility and control over the content of the report and interpretation. So again, if you want the report to include the information from the checklist, you can enter that into the system and it'll show up. The output reports can be saved in Word, PDF, or web-based format. You also have that option for that detailed score interpretation to be included in Appendix A. Interventions can be included, and I'm going to show you what that looks like when those interventions pop up for you to make choices from. And then I already said one or more of those checklists can be included. So we went over the evidence-based interventions in previous sessions. Again, all of the interventions that are included in the system were researched, they're research-based. So when you go in to run the comprehensive report, there will be a section, and you probably can't see it very well, but it's kind of in the back here in the shaded area. It says there's a report, and then there's intervention. When you click on inside that field, this will pop up. So these are all the interventions that were recommended for this particular student based off of how that student performed on the WJ test. So you can see there's a lot of options here for reading as well as math. And you can select all if you want to. You can pick and choose. If you click on them, they're going to give you a little synopsis over here as to how it's going to read in the report. So this is, I think, one of the most powerful pieces of the report, is being able to really link directly back to your assessment results, those interventions and accommodations that are needed for that particular student. So again, there's evidence-based interventions for the achievement. They have instructional interventions in there for the oral language and for the COG. There's both accommodations and interventions in the system. Again, they're written in narrative style for the report. It's based on that individual's performance, and then it's generated whenever performance falls within the limited or lower range. These are the different tests of achievement that provide evidence-based interventions. So the reading, the math, written language, and academic knowledge. And then I just included in here, for those of you who haven't been on the previous sessions, I just included in here a little excerpt of what that might look like in the report. So one of the things about the when we talk about impact statements, how is the disability impacting the student's progress in the general ed curriculum? And then we're talking, once we've identified the impact, then we have to look at, well, what does the student need to be successful? And this is where these recommendations come in. So these are, again, very written in a way that could be taken directly from your report and implemented by the teacher. So that is one of the things that is recommended, that when you are writing your recommendations, that those recommendations are detailed enough to where the teacher can pull it off of your report and actually implement it, or the parent, if they want to work with them at home. So that's one of the benefits of the interventions that are included in the WIIP platform, is that they are very detailed. And then you also can get those interventions for the cognitive ability area. So you can see how they performed in each of the G areas, those 7 broad G areas, and it will provide, again, some of those recommendations. And here's an example of a cognitive sample for fluid reasoning. You can see the student scored a standard score of 90, an RPI of 76 over 90. So low average range with regards to standard score. The RPI is telling us that while the student, same age peers, perform at 90% proficiency on those tasks involved in fluid reasoning, this particular student scored at 76% proficiency. So they're not quite up to where we would expect them to be. And so therefore, this is one of those interventions or recommendations that were provided by the system. One of the things about recommendations, I think about writing reports. I am more, I think it's more important to really consider quality over quantity. I know a lot of times we're like, well, how many recommendations should we include in the report? Well, I think we get good quality recommendations versus having 20 or more recommendations in the system. So really looking at quality of recommendations versus quantity. And then these are the tests of oral language. There's recommendations for oral expression, listening comprehension, phonetic coding and phonological awareness, and then also speed of lexical access. And then here's an example of one of the interventions that was provided for this particular child, who had a RPI of 54 over 90 for oral language and a standard score of 76. So again, tied directly to students' performance. And then the formative interventions are those where we can get even more detailed with regards to the types of errors that the student is making. Those are available on these tests: the letter word ID, applied problems, spelling, calculation, and word attack. You can also look at the types of errors that are tallied up in the oral reading test, and you can get some formative interventions recommended for each error type as well. So again, if you're wondering, well, how do I do that? How do I get those more in-depth formative interventions? Well, you have to go in when you're entering the scores into Riverside Score. You're not just putting the raw score here. You have to actually click on the items. And when you click on that items button, this will pop up. And what you would do is go in and put your ones and zeros for each of the items that was administered to the student. It's going to tally up the raw score here, and you can save it. And then when you run the interventions for the comprehensive report, the types of errors that the student made in this letter word identification test are going to help assist in populating the needed interventions. So provides intervention for teaching specific skill or concept. And again, it's based on sound teaching practices. etc. So these are a couple examples of what those formative interventions would look like in the report. So there's one for letter word identification. They talk about closed syllable and open syllable. So again, it gives detailed information with implementing that intervention as well, or recommendation. Same here for applied problems, teaching simple multiplication word problems. So it takes the teacher through some steps that they could utilize, or like I said, the parents could do the same, that they could utilize to assist the student. Now, another feature of the WIIP is the dyslexia report. And the dyslexia report offers a framework using various WJ4 clusters and tests to assist in the organization of assessment data and also in the determination of dyslexia. Again, the report, the system, the software itself does not diagnose, does not identify dyslexia, because there's obviously data sources that aren't included in the WIIP, but we can take the recommendations from the WIIP program that's going to include your checklists, it's going to include students' performance on the test. We can take that information and merge it with other data sources to make our decision. Basically, I look at the dyslexia report as more of a way to, gain additional insight, but also kind of, if there's a red flag that, there's a high chance that this student has dyslexia based off of the scores, we still have to take it back and look at, well, what do all the other data sources say as well. So big on not over relying on a software program to make our decisions. We as evaluators take this information, consolidate it with our other information, and we make the decision, not the program. So the dyslexia report is very detailed, just like the comprehensive report. And again, you can choose to use the checklist. So there's a dyslexia evaluation checklist for parent, teacher. There's a self-report checklist for the adolescent and adult. You can utilize the classroom behavior observations, and then also the writing evaluation. So we know that oftentimes there's comorbidity there with the reading difficulty and writing. So you can incorporate those into your report. This is the assessment services bulletin that I included as a handout for you guys, because this is what was used to really guide the creation of the dyslexia report. So when we're looking at that assessment services bulletin, this just kind of breaks it down. What we've done is we looked at, identifying the primary reading and spelling difficulties, and it has a list of, the different areas that we want to look at and consider as part of our comprehensive assessment for dyslexia. And it tells us which tests from the WJ should be utilized to measure, like reading rate, for example. We've got sentence reading fluency and we've got word reading fluency. For spelling, we've got a spelling test, and then we've got spelling of sounds. So basically the assessment bulletin puts together, kind of outlines this tool for you to help organize the data from the WJ test. And you can see this is just a snapshot from that. The primary reading and writing difficulties, areas tested are listed here, the battery that's used, what's the test date, what are the tests that feed into each of these areas, how did they score, what's the RPI, and any comments. So again, this is just a resource to help facilitate and organize the norm reference testing data. Again, this would be merged with other informal data to make decisions. This in itself should not be used solely to make decisions. It also goes through the secondary reading and writing difficulties, those different areas, and again, that's outlined on the dyslexia profile scores tool as well. So there's also the cognitive characteristics. Those are those non-reading related areas that are spared. You know, average to above average overall intelligence or overall cognitive functioning. Oral language and math skills may be intact. So again, we have in the profile scores, it has a list of those cognitive abilities, might be possible contributing factors, etc. So again, the dyslexia profile report does not diagnose dyslexia. It just basically provides a framework to discuss the primary and secondary characteristics of a student. You're able to, if you're pulling in those checklists, you can integrate valuable home and school qualitative information. And again, it aligns with that assessment services bulletin number 6 framework. And it makes conceptualization easier and more targeted. So with the dyslexia report components, again, you have the report itself and the checklists that can be included in the report. There's required tests that have to be administered, and then there's some optional tests. So it's important that if you guys do have the WIIP and you decide to use the dyslexia report, make sure you go into Riverside Score and download the information that's provided with regards to running the report, because you do have required tests that have to be given in order for the system to generate a report. So make sure that you pay attention to those as well, because we've had some evaluators call in, they're having trouble running the report, and it's because they haven't given all the required tests. So these are the required tests, and you can use this document as a reference as well. So you do have to give the letter word ID, the word attack, spelling the sounds. You can see all those listed here, picture vocabulary, understanding directions, oral vocabulary, number series, general information, and concept formation. So those are required in order to run the dyslexia report. Again, in order to generate the report, what you would do is in your report type, you would hit the drop down and you would choose the dyslexia report, and then you have your find your student, and then you include any test records, any checklists that were utilized in the system, and then you would choose your normative basis, you want to look at standard scores, any interventions based on the student's performance. You can see those are populated here in this little field, and then you select your output format. You want a PDF or you want a Word document where you can cut and paste some of the sections out into your report. Then from there, you just hit Run Report. If you didn't give the necessary required tests to run the report, you're going to get this little pop-up here that's going to tell you that you're missing tests. So you can go back and look at the document to see which tests were not included. And then there's also online help available for you. Again, through Riverside Score, there's a lot of different resources in there for you that you can utilize to gain more information about the report. These are the checklists. So if a user is entitled to the WIIP, they can find 2 dyslexia checklists available to them, and they can add those test records in the drop down. So again, you just pick and choose those when you're entering the student's data into the system. Pretty easy to use, and this is what that evaluation checklist for dyslexia looks like, and this is the parent form. And again, it's in a PDF that you can send to the parent to fill out, or if you're meeting with the parent, we talked about this last time, if you're meeting with the parent, you could always have your computer set up to where they could fill in the information while they're there with you, and it'll populate automatically into the system. Or if you're doing an interview with a parent, you could use this as a guide for your interview and enter the information in as you interview the parent. And then this is the dyslexia evaluation checklist teacher form. Same thing, same process you could use there as well. All right. And then there's an additional considerations in dyslexia assessment. So this is also on Riverside Score. It's just another resource just to, again, give you some additional guidance and basically reminding you that, you know, test scores alone, information from the score report and the checklist from the parent and the teacher alone should not be used to make a decision. We need to incorporate those other data sources as well. These are the report help and resources as well. So this is all up under Riverside Score. These will not populate unless your school has the WIIP. So if you go in and you don't find these, it's because you don't have access to the WIIP. And then at the beginning of every dyslexia report, it provides a purpose of report and dyslexia definition. So it includes the International Dyslexia Association definition as well as the functional definition of dyslexia. So that starts out every report. Again, the checklist information, you incorporate that into the system. It's going to lay it out for you like we see here. This is a parent form, and what they did, instead of having paragraphs consolidating the information from the parent, what they did is added them as more of a bulleted. So we thought that it would be easier to read. So you can see the parent form at the top and then the teacher form at the bottom. And then what they do is have a table of scores that show that dyslexia score profile. So you see the breakdown of those the basic reading skills, the reading fluency and rate, spelling, phoneme, graphing, knowledge. Again, it gives you your standard scores, your percentile ranks, the standard score classification, RPI, and then the proficiency that's associated with the RPI. And then it has the interpretation piece too. So it's showing the primary reading and spelling skills, and then they do have predictors of ability to learn when reading is not required. So comparing the student's performance in basic reading skills, reading fluency, and reading rate to their performance on the GFGC component or the broad oral language component or academic knowledge. So you can choose what the comparison is going to be. And again, it's going to provide you with checks in here. It indicates that primary reading and spelling skill is significantly lower than the ability measure used as a predictor. So we see here that in comparison to this student's GFGC composite, student has significantly lower performance in all areas that require reading, essentially. So again, it's just going to provide you with some additional information with regards to, you know, how the student performed on those reading tasks in relation to their performance on areas that don't require reading. And it's just going to give you that indication of whether there's a red flag there. The comparison methods, again, you can compare the student's performance to the GFGC composite. Of course, that requires that tests from the WJCOG be given. You could compare students' results to oral language or academic knowledge. So these are each considered a predictor in the method. And then there's the recommendations and interventions. So I just pulled out one of those, a snapshot of what that might look like in the report as well for your review. And then again, detailed interpretation of clusters and tests. So if you want to include that detailed report, you can choose that to be included in the report. So I wanted to finish off with just kind of taking you through and looking at the sample case study using the WIIIP, and this is Adam's sample. And what I wanted to show you is just some components from the comprehensive report. So this is Adam. You can see the dates of testing are included. Reason for referral, they utilized the reason for referral checklist from the WIIIP, inserted that information in the system, so it automatically populates, consolidates, the system consolidates that and populates that into the report. List of tests administered as well are there. If you had the teacher fill out the teacher checklist, again, all of that information will be automatically consolidated and put into narrative form and included in the report. So this is the information that was pulled from the teacher's report for that particular student. So you can see they indicate when the teacher completed the checklist. They described Adam as motivated and intelligent, but also insecure. At school, his mood is typical of others his age. He needs more one-on-one attention, but completes about as much schoolwork as other boys his age, etc. So it just takes all the information that the teacher provided that was put into the system and puts it in narrative form. There's also that test sessions observation form that you can complete. So again, if you enter that into the system, all that's going to populate as well. So it's going to give you a narrative form of what that student's behavior looked like during testing. And then interpretive overview of scores. Again, you can choose whether you're having the interpretation through standard scores or through proficiency with the RPI. And again, it will populate everything in the system for you in the report. And then finally, instructional recommendations and interventions. So based off of the student's performance, Adam's performance on the WJ test, they provided these instructional recommendations for him. So he may gain the most from reading instruction presented within the late first grade, early second grade range. In addition, Adam may benefit from a program of supplemental reading interventions, etc. So then it just kind of goes into more detail as you go through the report. So, you know, in summary, again, we've talked about the WIIIP over the course of the last of 3 different webinars, and there's a lot of research. A lot of resources in there that will help facilitate your comprehensive assessment. So again, it has a lot of checklists that can be included. It's got information with regards to item analysis on some of those academic tests. It provides you with formative intervention suggestions. Again, it creates that narrative report and scores, so examiner can focus on interpretation. So again, you would want to take it to the next level and actually go deeper into analyzing students' performance, looking at task demands, etc., and incorporating that into your report. But this kind of lays out and again links the WJ evaluations to instruction, to evidence-based or formative interventions. Also has accommodation recommendations as well. Again, it's convenient. It matches the interventions to the individual based on needs. So it really looks at how they performed on those tests and what that student needs to be successful. Again, convenient web-based entry, large number of interventions and accommodations, and again, it streamlines the comprehensive report. So if you have any questions on the WIIIP, please feel free to reach out. If you need a quote on the WIIP, you can reach out to me and I can send you to the appropriate person. I appreciate you guys being here today. Again, Friday will be our last presentation for the spring, so hopefully we will see you on Friday. Again, appreciate your time. Have a great day, and send me any feedback on recommendations, topic recommendations for fall offerings as well. Thank you. Have a great day.